My name is Elena Vane. In the world of high jewelry, they call me the Ice Queen. Not for my temperament, but for my eyes. I can spot a feather inclusion in a VVS1 diamond from 3 feet away, and I can tell the difference between a natural Burmese ruby and a heat-treated imitation by the way it breathes under a loupe. 10 years ago, I was the crown princess of Vane & Company, the most prestigious jewelry house in Europe. But my mother, Catherine Vane, a woman who values the brand more than the blood in her veins, accused me of stealing the celestial heart, a 50-carat blue diamond necklace that had been in our family for generations. She didn't just fire me, she erased me. She replaced me with her perfect daughter-in-law, Isabella, making her the face of the company, while I was cast into the cold. But diamonds are formed under pressure, and I didn't break. I became the head specialist at Sovereign's, the world's most elite auction house. Now, a decade later, Vane & Company is teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, and Catherine has come to me, begging me to authenticate the celestial heart for a global sale. She doesn't recognize the daughter she discarded, but she's about to find out that while stones can be faked, the truth is forever. A diamond is essentially carbon that refused to give up. It's a miracle of geometry and survival, but even the most perfect stone can be ruined by a single careless blow. In my family, that blow came from a velvet box and a mother's lie. The scent of Vane & Company was always the same: expensive lilies, floor wax, and the metallic tang of polished platinum. 10 years ago, that scent felt like home. Today, as I stood in my mother's private office, it felt like a crime scene. "Elena, darling, you were always so difficult," Catherine had said that night, her voice as sharp as a princess-cut edge. We were in the vault. The celestial heart was missing from its silk-lined pedestal. "The security footage shows someone with your clearance code entered the vault at 2 a.m. Only you and I have that sequence." I was asleep, Mother. I looked at the empty space. Someone must have cloned my biometrics. Check the logs again. I don't need logs when I have a reputation to protect. Isabella found the clasp in your vanity drawer this morning. The police are on their way. Unless, of course, you leave quietly, sign over your shares, leave the country, and I won't press charges. Vane & Company cannot afford a scandal involving the heir. I looked at Isabella, my brother's wife, standing by the door. She wore a look of practiced sympathy, but her eyes were dancing with triumph. I realized then that the theft wasn't about the diamond, it was about the throne. I was the expert, Isabella was the ornament, and Catherine preferred an ornament she could control. I left that night with nothing but a loupe and the clothes on my back. I spent years in the dusty workshops of Antwerp and the chaotic trading floors of Mumbai. I learned that the most valuable thing an appraiser has isn't their eyes, but their integrity. If you lie about a stone once, you are dead in this industry. Present day, Sovereign's Auction House, London. The double mahogany doors of my office opened. My assistant, Marcus, looked pale. "Miss Vane, the representatives from Vane & Company are here for their private appraisal. They're bringing the celestial heart." I adjusted my glasses. I had spent a decade building a new identity. To the world, I was Elena Thorne, the woman who once devalued a Russian oligarch's collection by $40 million because she found a microscopic trace of synthetic residue. In walked Catherine Vane. She was older, the lines around her mouth etched deeper by a decade of maintaining a facade of wealth while the company's stock crumbled. Behind her was Isabella, draped in silk, her face plastered on every billboard in Mayfair as the spirit of Vane. "Miss Thorne," Catherine said, extending a gloved hand. She didn't recognize me. To her, I was just a hurdle to be cleared before she could claim the $100 million payout she desperately needed to save her empire. "Vane and Company has a long history, Miss Vane," I said, my voice a neutral, professional hum. "But at Sovereigns, we don't buy history, we buy reality. Please, place the piece on the lightbox." Isabella stepped forward, her movements theatrical. She opened the leather case with a flourish. The celestial heart pulsed with a deep oceanic blue. It was breathtaking. To a layman, it was the pinnacle of human luxury. But as I leaned over the stone, pulling my loupe from my pocket, the same loupe I took the night I was exiled, something felt wrong. The refractive index seemed a fraction of a percent off. The way the light fired through the crown facets didn't have the soul of a natural Type 2B diamond. "The provenance is impeccable," Isabella chimed in, her voice grating. "It's been in the family since 1920. We have all the GIA certifications from the last 50 years. "Certifications can be forged, and stones can be swapped," I said, not looking up. "I need to perform a Raman spectroscopy and a cold light fluorescence test. Please wait in the lounge. This will take several hours." "Hours?" Catherine bristled. "This is a Vane heirloom. It shouldn't take more than a glance for an expert like you to see its perfection." "A glance is for tourists, Miss Vane," I replied, finally meeting her eyes. For a split second she squinted, as if a ghost had just walked over her grave. "A sovereign's appraisal is for eternity. Marcus, escort them out." Once the doors closed, I locked them. I didn't go to the spectrometer, I went to the microscope. I looked at the girdle of the stone. Every diamond has a birthmark. The real celestial heart had a tiny feather-shaped inclusion near the third pavilion facet, a flaw that made it unique. I searched for it. I rotated the stone under 40x magnification. Nothing. The stone was internally flawless, too flawless. Then I saw it, a microscopic laser inscription on the edge, invisible to the naked eye, a serial number that didn't belong to any mine in India or Africa. It was a batch number from a high-pressure, high-temperature lab in Geneva. "It's a lab-grown," I whispered, a cold shiver running down my spine. "It's a high-end synthetic, worth maybe $50,000, not $100 million. But then the realization hit me like a physical blow. If this was a fake, then Catherine and Isabella were either the world's biggest fools, or they were trying to pull off the greatest insurance fraud in history. I looked at the old family records I had secretly kept. I remembered the night of the theft. I remembered Catherine's haste to get rid of me. I pulled up the private ledger of a defunct Swiss bank that had been leaked years ago. There, in the transaction history from 10 years ago, was a deposit of $80 million into Catherine's private account. The buyer? A private collector in Brunei. The date of the sale? 3 days before the theft I was blamed for. "She sold it," I breathed, the loop trembling in my hand. She sold the real stone to save her own skin, framed her daughter for the theft, and then replaced it with a top-tier fake to keep the family legacy alive for the investors. Catherine Vane didn't just cast me out, she used me as the scapegoat for her own greed, and now she had brought the evidence of her crime directly to the one she had hurt the most. I looked at the blue stone. It was beautiful, but it was hollow, just like the woman in the other room. I checked the countdown for the public auction announcement, 24.00.00. I had 24 hours to decide. I could simply reject the stone and send them on their way, or I could do what Catherine did to me. I could turn the brand into a cage. I picked up my phone. Marcus, cancel my meetings for tomorrow and invite the press. Tell Sovereigns is making a historic declaration regarding the Vane & Company collection, and make sure the CEO of the GIA is on the guest list.
My dear ones, thank you for listening to this story. It makes me incredibly happy to feel that you are here with me. I try my best for you and post new videos every day, putting a piece of myself into them. If my stories resonate with you, your subscription and viewing of other videos will be the warmest support for me and inspiration to continue telling stories.
A flawless diamond is a myth. Every natural stone has a scar, a carbon fingerprint left by the earth millions of years ago. Perfection, in my world, is usually the first sign of a fake, and my mother's soul was so perfectly curated that it was bound to be synthetic. The grand ballroom of the Savoy was filled with the predatory energy of the world's elite. Billionaires, museum curators, and the international press had gathered for the authentication of the century. At the center of the stage, protected by a bulletproof glass case, lay the celestial heart. Catherine stood to the left, wearing a gown of charcoal silk that matched the coldness of her eyes. Isabella stood beside her, flashing a smile that was as bright and hollow as a zirconium crystal. They were basking in the attention, convinced that my signature would be the final seal on their fraudulent salvation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Catherine's voice projected through the room with practiced authority, "today, Sovereign's auction house will confirm what the world has known for a century. The Vane legacy is unbreakable. Miss Elena Thorne, the floor is yours." I stepped onto the stage. The cameras flashed, 1,000 digital eyes recording my every move. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at the necklace. It was a masterpiece of deception. To value a stone is to understand its journey, I began, my voice amplified by the lapel mic. The celestial heart was discovered in the Golconda mines. According to the Vane archives, it was gifted to the family in 1920. It survived wars, recessions, and a reported theft 10 years ago. I paused, feeling Catherine's gaze boring into the back of my head. However, science does not care for stories. It cares for the lattice. Marcus, bring up the Raman spectrometer results on the main screen. A complex graph appeared behind me. The lines were sharp, uniform, and aggressive. A natural diamond, formed in the Earth's mantle, has a specific disorder in its carbon structure. It is chaotic. It is alive. The stone in this case, however, shows a peak at 1332 inverse centimeters with a width of less than 1.5. This is the signature of a lab-grown HPHT diamond. A murmur rippled through the room like a cold wind. Catherine stepped forward, her face pale. "Mrs. Thorne, surely there is a mistake. This is a family heirloom. Perhaps your equipment is uncalibrated." "My equipment is perfect, Mrs. Vane," I said, turning to face her. "But the stone is not. This diamond was created in a lab in Geneva approximately 12 years ago. It is a beautiful imitation, worth perhaps the price of a mid-sized sedan. It is most certainly not the $100 million heart of your company." "This is an outrage," Isabella hissed, stepping toward the glass case. "You are destroying a century of prestige with a flawed graph." "I am not destroying your prestige, Isabella," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that echoed through the silent room. "But I am simply identifying the debris. But there's a more interesting question. If the real celestial heart isn't in this case, where is it?" I signaled Marcus again. A second document appeared on the screen, a scanned copy of a private bank transfer from 10 years ago. During my investigation, I found a record of a sale. 10 years ago, the original celestial heart was sold to a private collector in Brunei. The seller was Catherine Vane. The price was $80 million. The transaction took place exactly 72 hours before the theft that supposedly removed the stone from the Vane vault. The room exploded. Reporters surged forward, their microphones like spears. "Mrs. Vane, did you sell the family diamond? Did you frame your own daughter to cover the sale? Is Vane & Co. a house of cards?" Catherine grabbed the edge of the podium, her knuckles white. She looked at me, and for the first time in a decade, she saw me. The Ice Queen of Sovereign was no longer a stranger. "Elena," she whispered, the name barely audible over the chaos. "My name is Elena Thorne, and 10 years ago you told me that a diamond could be ruined by a single blow. You were right. You struck the blow, but I became the diamond, and diamonds don't break, they cut." You're doing this to destroy me," she hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and hatred. "No, Mother, I'm doing this to appraise you, and I found that you are internally flawed. Your value is 0. I walked off the stage as the police, whom I had called an hour earlier, entered the ballroom. They weren't there for the theft, they were there for the fraud. Catherine and Isabella were escorted out through the service entrance, their faces covered by silk scarves to hide from the very cameras they had invited. Back in my office, I sat in the dark. The blue fake lay on my desk, stripped of its glory. Marcus walked in with a glass of water. "The stock has plummeted, Elena. Vane & Co. is dead by morning. Every investor is pulling out. But there's a phone call from Brunei." I felt my heart skip a beat. "Put it through." A deep, measured voice came over the line. "Miss Thorne, I watched the broadcast. It seems you have a very intimate knowledge of the celestial heart. I have owned the original for 10 years. It is a lonely stone. It misses its home. But I suspect its home isn't a vault in London. It's the woman who knows its soul." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I am a man of art, not of business. I am returning the stone to Sovereign, not for sale, but for safe keeping. I want the Ice Queen to be its guardian. Consider it a tribute to the truth."
The weight of a diamond isn't measured only in carats, it's measured in the lives it has ruined. A 50-carat stone carries the gravity of a small planet, pulling everyone into its orbit of greed. I thought I wanted the stone to prove my innocence, but now that it's coming back, I realize I've invited a ghost back into my house. The private jet from Brunei touched down at Farnborough at 4 a.m. I was waiting on the tarmac, the cold morning air biting through my cashmere coat. Beside me stood Marcus and 2 armed security detail from Sovereigns. The collector hadn't sent a courier, he had sent a relic. A small, unassuming metal box was handed to me by a silent man in a dark suit. No flourishes, no velvet, just the raw, heavy reality of the celestial heart. Back in the secure vault of Sovereigns, I opened the case. The room seemed to grow colder. The blue of the diamond was deeper than the ocean, more intense than the synthetic debris I had exposed at the Savoy. I took my loupe and leaned in. There it was, the tiny, feather-shaped inclusion, the birthmark of a legend. "It's alive," Marcus whispered, standing back. "The fake looked like glass. This looks like it's breathing." "It's not breathing, Marcus. It's mocking us," I said, my voice low. "This stone cost me 10 years of my life. It cost my father's legacy, and now it's the only thing that can prove the chain of custody." Suddenly, my phone vibrated, an unrecognized number. I answered. "Elena, you've gone too far." The voice was familiar but distorted by rage. It was Adrian, my older brother, the man who had stayed silent when I was exiled, preferring his comfortable life as the director of operations to the truth. I didn't do anything, Adrian. Mother did. She sold the family's soul, and I just pointed out the price tag. You've destroyed the company. Thousands of employees are out of work because of your public performance. And now I hear you have the stone. That diamond belongs to the Vane estate. If you don't return it to me by noon, I'm filing for an immediate injunction and charging you with international theft. The collector returned it to me, Adrian, not to the company. He returned it to the person he felt was the rightful guardian. If you want it, you'll have to face the Jewelry Guild in Paris tomorrow. I'm taking the stone to the Grand Circle for a final adjudication of ownership. You won't make it to Paris, Elena. Isabella isn't as professional as I am. She's desperate, and a desperate woman with a fallen empire has nothing left to lose. Adrian was right about one thing. The stakes had shifted from reputation to survival. Vane & Co. was in liquidation, but the Celestial Heart was an asset that could pay off their debts and leave them with a fortune. I had to move. We had a private transport arranged for the Channel Tunnel, but as we pulled out of the Sovereign's loading bay in the armored USV, I noticed the black sedan trailing us. Not a professional tail, too aggressive, too close. Marcus, we have company, I said, checking the GPS. They're not waiting for Paris. They want it here, in the London rain. Hold on. Marcus signaled the driver. We swerved through the narrow streets of Bermondsey, trying to lose them in the industrial labyrinth, but the sedan was joined by a second vehicle. They were pinning us in. The lead car slammed into our side, the sound of grinding metal echoing like a gunshot. My head hit the window, a dull ache blooming behind my eyes. I clutched the briefcase, the one containing the stone, to my chest. They're going to force us off the bridge, Marcus shouted. The SUV spun, the tires screaming against the wet asphalt. We came to a halt, wedged against the railing of the Southwark Bridge. The two cars blocked us in. Men in masks stepped out, but it was the woman in the passenger seat who caught my eye. Isabella. She wasn't wearing her face of the brand smile. She was wearing a look of feral hunger. She stepped out, a small, elegant pistol in her hand. Give it to me, Elena. You've had your revenge. You've killed the company. Just give me the stone, and you can go back to your pathetic little auction house. You really think this diamond will save you, Isabella? The world knows it was sold. The GIA has the record. If you take this stone, you're not a brand ambassador anymore. You're just a common thief. Exactly what you tried to make me. I don't care about the GIA. I have a buyer on the black market who doesn't ask for papers. Give it to me, or I swear I'll leave you on this bridge the way you left us at the Savoy. I looked at the water below. Then I looked at the briefcase. I knew something Isabella didn't. I knew that the real Celestial Heart had a specific physical property. It was one of the few diamonds that exhibited strong phosphorescence under UV light. It glowed red when the light was cut. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a high-intensity UV torch. You want the heart, Isabella. Look at it one last time. I opened the case. The blue stone sat there, cold and majestic. I clicked the torch. The diamond absorbed the light, and when I snapped it off, it glowed a haunting, bloody crimson in the dark. It's beautiful, isn't it? I whispered, but it only glows for the truth. For you, it's just a rock. I didn't hand it to the case. I threw it. Not to her, but over the railing into the dark, churning waters of the Thames. No, Isabella screamed, lunging for the railing, her gun forgotten as she watched the black leather box disappear into the abyss. She turned on me, her face a mask of madness. You destroyed it. You threw away $100 million.
"No, Isabella," I said, as the sirens of the city police began to wail in the distance. The silent alarm in the briefcase had been active since we left the vault. "I just put it back where it belongs, in the dark, where people like you can't touch it." But as the police surrounded the bridge and Isabella was tackled to the ground, I felt a weight in my inner coat pocket. The briefcase I had thrown was a decoy, a high-tech shell Marcus and I prepared for this exact scenario. The real celestial heart was still against my chest, warm and heavy.
The high jewelry world isn't a market, it's a cathedral. And like all cathedrals, it's built on foundations of stone, sacrifice, and dark confessionals. The Grand Cercle in Paris is where the final judgment is passed. If they find out the diamond I carry is the spark of a much larger fire, they won't just take the stone, they'll erase the vain name forever. Paris in the rain feels like a watercolor painting left out to dry. I stepped out of the Gare du Nord, clutching my vintage leather bag. The real celestial heart was stitched into the lining, resting against my ribs like a cold, heavy secret. To the world, I was a tragic figure, the woman who lost a legend in the Thames. To the man waiting for me in the Place Vendôme, I was a survivor with questions. The Grand Cercle was located behind an unmarked door of a 17th century mansion. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old parchment and expensive tobacco. I was led into a library where a man sat by a fireplace, his hands trembling slightly as he polished a pair of spectacles. "Elena," he said, not looking up, "you have your father's walk, heavy with purpose, yet light enough to hide." "Monsieur Duperret," I replied, bowing my head slightly. He was the Grand Master of the Guild and had been my father's closest confidant before the incident 10 years ago. "I assume the news of the Southwark Bridge has reached your ears." "The world mourns a tragedy, but the Guild knows the difference between a splash and a dive." Duperret smiled, finally looking at me. His eyes were sharp like polished obsidian. "You played Isabella perfectly, but you didn't come here to show me your acting skills. You came to ask why your mother would commit professional suicide." I reached into my bag and produced the stone. Without its velvet case, the blue diamond seemed even more radiant, catching the firelight and throwing jagged shadows against the ancient books. "She sold it 10 years ago, monsieur. She framed me to cover the gap. Why? The Vane accounts were healthy back then. There was no financial reason to sell the celestial heart." Duperret sighed, holding the stone to the light. "Your mother wasn't selling for profit, Elena. She was paying a silence tax. Your father, God rest his soul, was a visionary, but he had a secret that predates the Vane brand. He didn't find the celestial heart in a mine. He found it in a history book." "What are you saying?" My heart began to race. "The stone isn't Indian, Elena. It's part of the lost French crown jewels stolen during the Revolution and recut in the mid-19th century to hide its origin. Your father discovered the truth and bought it from a black market source in the 1950s. If the French government or the international courts found out, Vane and Company would be sued for billions and the family would face criminal charges for laundering historical artifacts." The room seemed to tilt. The Vane legacy was built on a stolen son. Catherine hadn't just been protecting her ego, she had been protecting a lie that could dismantle the entire jewelry industry. If the heart was proven to be a stolen crown jewel, every major house that had ever authenticated it would lose their credibility. "Someone found out," I whispered. "Someone blackmailed her."
A group known as the Facet, Duperret said, his voice dropping to a whisper. They are the shadows of the market. They don't want the stone. They want the leverage. They forced your mother to sell the real stone to their collector in Brunei to fund their operations. The fake she brought to you was their way of seeing if the new vein, Isabella, could keep the lie going. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the library burst open, not by force, but with the cold elegance of an invasion. In walked a man I hadn't seen in years. He was tall, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than a high-end emerald. Julian Vane, my father's younger brother, my uncle, the man who had been traveling the world for the last decade. Uncle Julian, I stood up, instinctively reaching for the stone on the table. Elena, put the diamond down, Julian said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. Behind him stood two men I didn't recognize, men who looked more like mercenaries than appraisers. Monsieur Duperret is an old romantic, but he's out of time. The Vane legacy isn't about history, it's about survival, and right now the heart is the only thing keeping the Facet from burning us all. You're one of them, I realized, the coldness spreading through my limbs. You're part of the Facet. You helped Mother sell the stone. I saved the family, Elena. While you were playing the Ice Queen in London, I was negotiating with people who make the GIA look like a kindergarten. We need that stone to fulfill a contract. If we don't deliver the original back to the Facet tonight, they will release the DNA records of every stone in the Vane vault. Every client we have will realize they are legal liabilities. Julian stepped forward, his hand outstretched. Give it to me, Elena, for the family, for the thousands of workers whose names you pretend to care about. I looked at Monsieur Duperret. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod towards the fireplace. I saw it then, a hidden lever behind the mantelpiece. The family died the night you let Mother lie about me, Julian. A legacy built on theft isn't a legacy. It's a debt, and I'm here to settle it. I didn't hand him the stone. I threw a heavy crystal paperweight at the nearest guard and dove for the mantelpiece. As I pulled the lever, the library floor beneath the rug gave way to a hidden staircase, a prestige tunnel used by the guild for centuries to move valuables during riots. "Go, Elena!" Duperret shouted, throwing himself in front of Julian. I tumbled into the darkness of the tunnel, the celestial heart clutched in my fist. I could hear the shouts of Julian's men above me, the sound of boots on stone. I ran through the cold, damp passage that led towards the Seine. I wasn't just running from my uncle, I was running from a century of lies. If the stone was stolen, then the rightful owner wasn't me, and it wasn't the Facet. It was the people of France. I reached the end of the tunnel, emerging into the crisp air of a Parisian alleyway. My phone buzzed, a message from an encrypted source. The Ice Queen has the crown. The Facet is watching. Meet at the Louvre, the pyramid, at midnight. Bring the truth, or stay in the dark. I looked at the blue diamond. It wasn't a heart anymore. It was a key that could unlock the secrets of the great four jewelry houses and change the world of luxury forever.
My dear ones, thank you for listening to this story. It makes me incredibly happy to feel that you are here with me. I try my best for you and post new videos every day, putting a piece of myself into them. If my stories resonate with you, your subscription and viewing of other videos will be the warmest support for me and inspiration to continue telling stories.
The problem with ghosts is that they don't stay in the past. They wait for the right frequency, the right refraction of light to manifest in your reality. I spent 10 years mourning a father who died in a car accident in Monaco.
Tonight, under the glass pyramid of the Louvre, I realized that the accident wasn't a tragedy, it was an exit strategy. Midnight. The Louvre was a skeletal masterpiece of light and shadow. I stood by the pyramid, the celestial heart feeling like a hot coal in my pocket. The air was still, save for the distant hum of the city. Then a figure stepped out from behind a marble pillar. He was older, his hair white, his face scarred by time, and something more violent. But the eyes were mine. "You're late, Elena." His voice was a rasping echo of the lullabies he used to sing me. "Dad?" The word felt like a splinter in my throat. "Alexander Vane died in Monaco. I saw the wreckage. I saw the closed casket." "You saw what the guild wanted you to see," Alexander said, stepping into the moonlight. "The facet doesn't let its best architects retire. They either become legends or they become ghosts. I chose the latter to keep you and Catherine safe. Or so I thought." "Safe?" I scoffed, my voice rising with a decade of suppressed pain. "Mother framed me. She sold your legacy to a black market collector. Uncle Julian is hunting me through the streets of Paris. Is this your version of safety?" Catherine did what she had to do to pay the shadow rent. She was never meant to be the player, only the curator. But the celestial heart, Elena, you have to understand, it's not just a stolen crown jewel, it's a vessel. He walked closer, his movements stiff. He pulled out a small ultraviolet laser pointer. "Give me the stone." I hesitated, then placed the blue diamond in his weathered palm. He shone the laser through the table of the stone at a specific 42-degree angle. On the pavement of the Louvre courtyard, a complex geometric pattern appeared, not just a reflection, but a map of a high-security vault. There are 12 of them, the 12 crowns of shadows. When light passes through them at the correct frequency, they project the fragments of a master key. This key doesn't open a jewelry box. It opens the Templar repository hidden beneath the Swiss National Bank, a vault containing the black ledgers of Europe's elite. The facet wants the ledgers, I realized. They want to blackmail every government and every royal house on the continent, and Vane & Co. was just a front to gather the 12 stones. Exactly. I spent my life tracking them down under the guise of acquisitions, but I realized too late that I was building a cage for the world. I had to disappear to break the chain. But your mother, she couldn't let go of the lifestyle. She tried to play both sides, and the facet caught her. Suddenly, the red dots of sniper lasers danced across the stone floor. We weren't alone. "Alexander! Elena!" Julian's voice boomed from the shadows of the Richelieu wing. He wasn't alone this time. He was accompanied by a woman in a crimson suit, Madame Vesper, the rumored matriarch of the facet. "The reunion is touching, but we have a schedule to keep. Alexander, you've played ghost long enough. Hand over the heart, and we might let your daughter keep her tongue. We need the final fragment of the map." "The map is incomplete without the blood of a Vane," my father whispered to me, his hand closing tight over the diamond. "They can't use the stones without our biometrics. That's why they needed you to authenticate it, Elena. Your touch on the lightbox in London was not just for appraisal, it was for registration." I looked at my father, then at Julian, then at the cold, calculating eyes of Madame Vesper. I realized then that I was the final piece of the puzzle. My 10 years of exile, my rise as a world-class appraiser, it was all a refining process. They wanted me to become the perfect tool. "I won't do it," I said, stepping in front of my father. "I'd rather crush this stone into dust than let you use it to enslave the market." "Dust won't help you, Elena," Vesper smiled. We already have the other 11, and we have your mother. She's currently in a private suite in the Alps. If the heart doesn't reach the repository by dawn, the suite becomes her tomb." My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrible choice. He knew the cost of the secret, but he also knew the cost of his wife's life. "The repository is a trap, Vesper," Alexander shouted. "The Templars didn't just hide gold, they hid a collapse protocol. If the wrong hands open that vault, it triggers a global financial reset. You'll be the queen of a world that has no currency." "We've accounted for the protocol," Julian chimed in, his greed overriding his common sense. "We have the Swiss codes. We just need the heart." "Elena," my father whispered, leaning into my ear, "in the base of the stone, near the feather inclusion, there's a fracture point. If you apply 500 pounds of pressure at that exact spot, the stone doesn't break, it inverts. It'll scramble the map and lock the repository forever. But it'll also signal our location to everyone. We won't get out of here." "I don't care about getting out. I care about ending this," I whispered back. I took the stone from my father's hand. I looked at Madame Vesper and began to walk towards her, my hands raised in a mock gesture of surrender. "I'll give you the stone, but I want to be the one to place it. I want to see the black ledgers for myself. I want to know the price of my soul." "A wise girl," Vesper purred. "Come, the helicopter is waiting on the roof." But as I walked past my father, I caught the look in his eyes. It wasn't fear, it was a blessing. I had the celestial heart in my palm, and my thumb was already searching for the fracture point. I wasn't going to the Alps to save my mother. I was going to the heart of the conspiracy to perform the final appraisal.
The purity of a diamond is graded by its inclusions, the tiny flaws trapped inside during its formation. I always thought my flaw was my mother's coldness. I was wrong. My flaw was my very existence. I wasn't born into the vain legacy. I was harvested for it. And today, in a vault carved from alpine granite, the Ice Queen is finally going to melt the throne. The Swiss National Bank's private sector was a labyrinth of titanium and silence. We descended 5 floors below the surface, where the air felt pressurized and tasted of liquid nitrogen. Madame Vesper led the way, her heels clicking a rhythmic death march. My father, Alexander, walked behind me, his eyes fixed on the floor. He couldn't look at the monster he had helped create. We reached the central chamber. In the middle of the room stood a circular console with 11 indentations. Each held a glowing diamond, some yellow, some pink, some emerald green. The 12 crowns of shadows. The space for the celestial heart was empty, waiting like a hungry mouth. In a reinforced glass room at the back sat Catherine. She looked disheveled, but the moment she saw me, her face contorted into that familiar mask of aristocratic disdain. "So, the thief returns?" she spat, her voice projected through the intercom. "Alexander, I told you she was too smart for her own good. You should have ended it in London." "Enough, Catherine," Alexander said, his voice hollow. "The game is over. Elena knows, or she's about to." "Knows what?" I demanded, holding the celestial heart so tight the edges cut into my palm. "That you're both criminals? That the Vane brand is built on blood? I already know that." "You know nothing, Elena," Catherine laughed, a jagged, hysterical sound. "You think I hated you because you were difficult? I hated you because every time I looked at your face, I saw Gabrielle de la Roche, the woman who actually owned this stone, the woman your heroic father killed during a heist in 1990 because she wouldn't sign over the deeds." I felt the world tilt. Gabrielle de la Roche,
the name from the French archives, the last legitimate descendant of the line that held the crown jewels. We couldn't just kill the bloodline. We needed the biometrics. We needed a child who could pass the genetic filters of the Templar repository. So we took you. We raised you. We trained your eyes to see the truth so you could eventually open this door for us. You aren't a vein, Elena. You are a living key. I looked at Alexander. He didn't deny it. I loved your mother, Elena. Gabrielle was a casualty of a war you don't understand, but I grew to love you too. That's why I staged my death, to stop them from using you. You didn't stop them, I screamed. You let them shape me into this. You let them turn me into an ice queen so I would be cold enough to do your dirty work. Focus, Elena. Madame Vesper interrupted, her pistol appearing in her hand. Place the stone now. The biometrics in your fingertips will activate the console. I looked at the 11 diamonds glowing in the room. I looked at the celestial heart. And then I remembered what my father told me under the Louvre, the fracture point. I didn't place the stone. I held it up to the light box on the console. If I open this vault, I said, my voice steadying with a cold, terrifying resolve, the facet gets the black ledgers. You control the world's secrets. But if I don't, you kill my mother and probably me. Is that the deal? Precisely, Vesper said. Then I choose a third option, I whispered. I didn't use my fingertips. I took a heavy platinum weighing disc from the tech table and placed it over the celestial heart. I calculated the angle, the exact 42 degrees of the recut pavilion. Elena, what are you doing? Julian shouted, stepping forward. I'm performing a final appraisal, I said. I slammed the weighing disc down with all my strength, focused on the microscopic fracture point. The celestial heart didn't shatter into pieces. It did something far more violent. The internal structure of the stone, the inversion my father spoke of, triggered a massive piezoelectric discharge. The blue light turned into a blinding prismatic wave that surged through the console. Warning, biometric sabotage detected, security protocol, scramble lock engaged, all 12 crowns desynchronized. The 11 other diamonds in the room began to crack. The glowing map on the ceiling flickered and died. The black ledgers were being erased, the digital keys melting under the surge of the inverted heart. No! Vesper roared, firing her weapon. The bullet grazed my shoulder, but the room was already descending into chaos. The collapse protocol Alexander had warned about was active. The vault doors began to seal, not to keep us in, but to bury the repository forever. The vault is flooding with halon gas, Julian screamed, clawing at the titanium doors. I grabbed my father's hand. We have to go, now. I'm not going anywhere, Elena, Alexander said, pushing me toward the emergency service lift. I started this fire. I have to stay to make sure it doesn't spread. Take the heart fragments. They're useless now, but they're the only thing left of Gabrielle. Dad, no! Go! He shoved me into the lift and hit the override. As the doors closed, I saw Catherine screaming behind her glass wall as the gas filled the chamber. I saw Julian and Vesper fighting over the cracked diamonds on the floor, scavengers fighting over the ruins of a dead world. I emerged into the crisp morning air of the Swiss mountains. I was alone. My shoulder was bleeding. My family was gone, and the Vane legacy was a pile of dust 5 stories underground. I opened my hand. In my palm lay 3 jagged shards of the celestial heart. They no longer glowed blue. They were clear, transparent, and simple. Without the shadow map, they were just diamonds. I sat on the snow and cried, not for Catherine, not for the brand, but for Gabrielle Delaroche, the mother I never knew, whose life had been stolen for a stone that I had just destroyed. But as I looked at the shards, I noticed something. One of the fragments had a tiny laser-etched sequence on the interior, revealed only by the fracture. It wasn't a bank code, it was a coordinate. The heart of the lie is in London, the truth is in the workshop. I realized then that the black ledgers weren't the only thing my father was hiding. There was a 13th stone, the White Queen, the one stone that wasn't part of the crown, but the one that controlled the others, and my father had hidden its location inside the one place I would never think to look.
Trust is the only gem that cannot be recut once it's shattered. You can polish a diamond, you can heat treat a ruby, but once trust is gone, it turns into coal. I walked into the ruins of my childhood with 3 shards of a blue lie and a coordinate that pointed to the very center of the vein workshop. I expected to find a treasure. I found a betrayal. The air in the Hatton Garden workshop was thick with dust and the metallic scent of copper and grease. The workbenches where I had spent my teens were covered in plastic sheets, looking like row after row of shrouded corpses. I moved toward the back, toward the heavy antique safe that my father had always called the heart of the forge. I used the coordinate from the diamond shard. It wasn't a combination for the dial, it was a physical location under the floorboards beneath the safe. I pried the wood up, my fingers bleeding, until I found it, a small, lead-lined cylinder. "You were always so meticulous, Elena," a voice said from the shadows. I froze. I didn't need to turn around to recognize the calm, analytical tone. Marcus. He stepped into the dim light of my torch. He wasn't wearing his usual assistant suit. He was dressed in the high-collared black coat of the guild auditor. "I was beginning to think you'd stay in Switzerland." The inversion was a brilliant move, by the way. It destroyed the black ledgers, but it did exactly what we needed. It cleared the board of the amateurs. My uncle Julian, the facet, even your parents, all gone. "We?" I whispered, my hand tightening around the lead cylinder. "Who is we, Marcus?" "The eternal guild," he said, walking closer. "Not the bickering families like the Vanes or the Delaroche, the people who actually control the scarcity of the market. You see, Elena, diamonds aren't rare. They never were. We've been mining them by the ton in Siberia and Africa for a century. Trust is the only gem that cannot be recut once it's shattered. You can polish a diamond, you can heat treat a ruby, but once trust is gone, it turns into coal. I walked into the ruins of my childhood with 3 shards of a blue lie and a coordinate that pointed to the very center of the vein workshop. I expected to find a treasure. I found a betrayal. The air in the Hatton Garden workshop was thick with dust and the metallic scent of copper and grease. The workbenches where I had spent my teens were covered in plastic sheets, looking like row after row of shrouded corpses. I moved toward the back, toward the heavy antique safe that my father had always called the heart of the forge. I used the coordinate from the diamond shard. It wasn't a combination for the dial, it was a physical location under the floorboards beneath the safe. I pried the wood up, my fingers bleeding, until I found it, a small, lead-lined cylinder. "You were always so meticulous, Elena," a voice said from the shadows. I froze. I didn't need to turn around to recognize the calm, analytical tone. Marcus. He stepped into the dim light of my torch. He wasn't wearing his usual assistant suit. He was dressed in the high-collared black coat of the guild auditor. "I was beginning to think you'd stay in Switzerland." The inversion was a brilliant move, by the way. It destroyed the black ledgers, but it did exactly what we needed. It cleared the board of the amateurs. My uncle Julian, the facet, even your parents, all gone. "We?" I whispered, my hand tightening around the lead cylinder. "Who is we, Marcus?"
"The eternal guild," he said, walking closer. "Not the bickering families like the Vanes or the Delaroche, the people who actually control the scarcity of the market. You see, Elena, diamonds aren't rare. They never were. We've been mining them by the ton in Siberia and Africa for a century. The value is a consensus, a beautifully maintained hallucination. I know how the market works, Marcus. I'm an appraiser." "No, you don't understand the scale. Open the cylinder." I unscrewed the cap. Inside wasn't a diamond. It was a high-capacity encrypted drive and a small, clear stone that looked like a common pebble. I held it up to my torch. It was a white queen, the most perfect synthetic ever created. "That stone was created in 1955 by your father. He was the first to perfect the process. He didn't find the celestial heart, he made it. And then he made the others. Every legendary stone that has entered the market through Vane & Co. in the last 50 years is a lab-grown masterpiece. The Vane legacy isn't theft, Elena, it's creation." My breath hitched. The entire industry, the billions of dollars, the history of the 12 crowns, it was all a fabrication. My father wasn't a thief of crown jewels. He was the greatest forger in human history. "The drive contains the chemical signatures of every major diamond in the world's royal collections. If you publish that data, the diamond market collapses. De Beers, Tiffany, the Guild, everything becomes worthless overnight. Gold will be the only thing left. The White Queen is the kill switch for the world's luxury economy." "And you want it," I said, realizing why he had stayed by my side for 5 years. "The Guild wants it to stay hidden. We want to usher in a new era of controlled rarity. But I have a different plan. I want you to lead us, Elena. You are the only one with the technical skill to continue your father's work and the reputation to make the world believe the lie for another century. We can be the new Great Four. We can rule the shadow market together." I looked at the drive. I looked at the pebble that had dictated my life. I realized that my father's sacrifice in the Alps wasn't to save me from the facet. It was to see if I would choose the truth or the throne. The White Queen was my inheritance. "My father killed a woman for this dream," I said, my voice echoing in the hollow workshop. "He killed Gabrielle Delaroche because she found out her heirlooms were fakes. He didn't take me to protect the bloodline. He took me to see if a Delaroche could be trained to love the lie." "Does it matter?" asked Marcus, stepping into my personal space. "The world wants to be lied to, Elena. They want the forever that a diamond promises. They don't want the carbon truth. They want the dream." I looked at Marcus, my friend, my betrayer. I saw the same hunger in his eyes that I had seen in Catherine's, the hunger for a power that wasn't real. "I spent 10 years in the cold because of this dream," I said. "I lost my name, my mother, and my soul to your consensus, and you think I want to be its queen? If you don't join us, you're just a woman with a drive that no one will believe," Marcus hissed, his voice losing his calm. "You forgot one thing, Marcus. I'm the Ice Queen of sovereigns. I don't just appraise stones, I appraise value." I didn't try to run. I walked to the central workbench, the one with the high-pressure hydraulic press we used for testing the crush strength of industrial gems. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded. "I'm ending the auction," I said. I placed the White Queen stone and the encrypted drive into the press. My hand hovered over the lever. "If I pull this, the signatures are gone. The proof of the forgery dies. But the White Queen, the prototype, shatters. And without the prototype, your controlled rarity has no master key. The market stays as it is, a beautiful, fragile lie that you can't control." "You'll be nothing," Marcus roared, lunging for me. "You'll have no leverage, no family, no history." "I'll have the only thing a Vane ever lacked," I said, my eyes locking onto his, the truth. I pulled the lever. The sound was like a bone breaking.
The white queen disintegrated into a fine white powder. The drive snapped, its circuits crushed beyond repair. The secret of the century was now a pile of dust on a dirty workbench. Marcus fell to his knees, staring at the debris. He looked like a man who had just seen his god die. I walked past him, toward the exit. I didn't look back. As I stepped out into the London morning, the sun was beginning to break through the fog. For the first time, the light didn't feel like it was being refracted through a lens. It was just light. My phone buzzed, a final message from a ghost, my father's private line. Well appraised, Elena. The ice has finally melted. Look in your coat pocket. The real heart was never a stone. I reached into my pocket and found a small handwritten note on old Vane & Co. stationery. It was a deed to a small cottage in the south of France called Le Repos de Gabriel. I didn't have $100 million diamond. I didn't have a global empire. I didn't even have a family name I could be proud of. But as I walked toward the train station, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that no diamond could ever match.
My dear ones, thank you for listening to this story. It makes me incredibly happy to feel that you are here with me. I try my best for you and post new videos every day, putting a piece of myself into them. If my stories resonate with you, your subscription and viewing of other videos will be the warmest support for me and inspiration to continue telling stories.
A diamond reflects light, but it doesn't create it. For too long, I let the brilliance of a stone define the boundaries of my world. I thought that without the Vane name, I would be a shadow. But as I stood in front of a small, sun-drenched cottage in the south of France, I realized that shadows only exist where there is light, and for the first time in my life, the light was mine. The village of Gourds sat like a crown of golden stone upon the hills of Provence. I arrived with nothing but a small suitcase and the handwritten note from my father. The air here didn't smell of nettle and polish. It smelled of lavender, wild thyme, and freedom. I found the cottage, Le Repos de Gabriel, tucked away at the end of a winding dirt path. It was a modest house of honey-colored limestone, with shutters the color of sage, and a sprawling garden of overgrown roses. This was the place Gabrielle de la Roche had dreamed of, the life that was stolen from her so that the Vanes could build their house of cards. The key was hidden where the note said it would be, inside an old iron birdhouse near the gate. As the lock turned, I felt a strange sense of homecoming. Inside, the house was silent, preserved in a coat of dust and memories. I headed straight for the small study in the attic. My father's note had mentioned a final appraisal, and I knew him well enough to know he wouldn't leave me with just a piece of land. Underneath the loose floorboard behind the desk, I found a small wooden chest. It wasn't lined with velvet or silk. It was lined with simple wool. Inside were not dozens of stones, but five rough, uncut diamonds, each the size of a walnut. I didn't need a loupe to know what they were, the raw, greasy luster of natural, unenhanced stones. These were the real French crown jewels, the ones Gabrielle had swapped for high-quality fakes before the Vanes could seize her collection. She had outplayed them from the beginning, leaving the thieves to fight over the beautiful lies, while she hid the truth for a daughter she hoped would one day find them. Beside the stones was a leather-bound diary. I spent the night reading Gabrielle's words. She hadn't been a victim, she had been a guardian. "To my daughter," the last entry read, "if you find these, it means the world of the Vanes has failed. Do not return these stones to the market. The market is a cage. Use them to build something that cannot be bought. Use them to set the truth free." 1 month later. The world of high jewelry was still reeling from the London dust-up. Without the proof from the drive I destroyed, the market hadn't collapsed, but the prestige of Vane & Co. was gone.
Marcus had vanished into the shadows of the guild, and Catherine remained missing after the Swiss vault accident, officially a tragic accident, unofficially a burial of the Facet's secrets. I sat in my garden watching the sun dip below the horizon. I had made my choice. I didn't sell the stones. Instead, I contacted a private non-profit foundation dedicated to tracking conflict diamonds and improving the lives of miners in the global south. I donated the De La Roche diamonds to their permanent museum collection, with one condition: they were to be used as a standard of truth. Every year, the foundation would host a gala where the stones were displayed, not as symbols of wealth, but as reminders of the human cost of the industry. The White Queen may have been a lie, but the Gabrielle standard became the new benchmark for ethical transparency. I also released an anonymous dossier to a group of investigative journalists. It didn't contain the chemical signatures that would crash the economy, but it contained enough evidence of the guild's shadow monopolies and the Vane family's historical frauds to trigger a global investigation. The consensus was changing. The hallucination was being replaced by accountability. My phone buzzed on the wooden table, a message from Sovereign's auction house. Ms. Thorne, the board has voted. We would like to offer you the global director position. You can set your own terms. We need the Ice Queen to restore our reputation. I looked at the message, then at the lavender fields stretching toward the mountains. I thought about the velvet boxes, the armored cars, and the cold blue light of the celestial heart. Then I looked at my hands, stained with soil from the garden, but clean of blood. I typed a simple reply. Elena Thorne is no longer in the business of appraising stones. She is busy appraising a life. The answer is no. I stood up and walked toward the house. Inside, the fireplace was crackling, and a glass of local wine was waiting. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't need a diamond to feel brilliant. I was Elena de la Roche, and my legacy wasn't a stone, it was the light. The celestial heart was gone. The Ice Queen was gone. Only the truth remained.